Before he made anything, from the beginning, I was set up from eternity and of old. We, in our present state, conceive this eternity of God as an interminable time. But what were the things of old, since none had been created? It is clear that the three persons are here spoken of, namely, that she was foreseen from the eternal ages of the divinity by the beings which alone are ancient, namely, the indivisible Trinity, since all the rest, having a beginning, are recent. That she was foreseen when only the ancient uncreated was, and before any ideals of the future creation were formed. Between these two extremes intervened the ideal of the hypostatic union, which was to be verified ad extra through the intervention of Most Holy Mary. Both were ordained together, immediately next to God and before any other creature, and it was the most wonderful decree ever passed or ever to be passed. The first and most admirable image in the mind of God, next to the eternal generation, was that of Christ, and next to it, that of his mother. And what other order could there be in God, in whom all that pertains to him is present at one and the same time, so that no part of his being must await the perfection of another, or one perfection ever need succeed upon others? All is well ordered in his eternal nature, and so it was and will be forever. The new ordainment, however, was that the person of the Son should become incarnate, and that from his deified humanity should begin the order of God's desires and of his decrees ad extra. He was to be the head and ideal of all other men and creatures, for this was the most appropriate order and harmony to be instituted among creatures, that they have one who is the first and the highest, and that from him should descend the order of all nature, and in a special manner of the mortals. First among them all, however, was the mother of the man-God, as the supreme among mere creatures, following immediately upon Christ, and through him upon the divinity. Thus the conduits which led the crystalline fountains of the divinity from the eternal throne meet first in the humanity of the Word, and immediately thereafter in his Holy Mother, in the degree and in the manner as it was possible for a mere creature, and as it was proper for the Mother of the Creator. It was equitable that all the divine attributes should exert themselves in her without reserve, so far as she was capable, and that she be inferior only to Christ our Lord. She was to be superior in the degree of his incomparable graces to all the rest of the creatures that are deserving of graces and gifts. This then was the order so well instituted by the eternal wisdom, that all was to commence with Christ and his mother. Therefore, the text adds, "Before the earth was made, and the depths were not as yet, and I was already conceived." This earth was that of the first Adam, for before his creation was decreed, and before the abysses of the ideas ad extra were formed in the divine mind, the likenesses of Christ and of his mother were already conceived. The forms are called abysses because there is an infinite distance between the being of God and that of creatures. This distance was measured, speaking according to our own way of understanding, when the ideas of the creatures were formed, for then these very abysses were formed. Not only was the Word conceived before all these by eternal generation from the Father, but his temporal generation from the Virgin Mother full of grace had already been decreed and conceived in the divine mind, inasmuch as no efficacious and complete decree of this temporal generation could exist without at the same time including his mother, and such a mother, the most holy Mary, was then and there conceived within that beautiful immensity, and her eternal record was written in the bosom of the divinity, in order that for all the ages it should never be blotted out. She was stamped and delineated in the mind of the eternal Artificer, and possessed the inseparable embraces of his love. Neither had the fountains of waters as yet sprung out. The images and ideas of creatures had not yet sprung from their source and origin, for they had not yet broken from the fountains through the channels of God's goodness and mercy, through which the divine will was to be moved to create the universe and to communicate his divine attributes and perfections. In respect to the entire rest of the universe, these waters and fountains were still repressed and detained within the bounds of the immense ocean of the divinity. In his own being there were as yet no founts or currents for outward manifestation, not having until then met their proper object, namely men. But when these were encountered, the sacred humanity of Christ and his Virgin Mother had already furnished proper objects of benevolence. And therefore it is added,